up front. Welcome on this snowy Thursday morning. Quick announcements for those of you who are taking the class. If you still don't have your attendance card, please contact one of the TAs or me after class. Also, be sure to follow Convocation's new Instagram page, Snow Convocation. Okay, that'll give you updates and notifications of what's going on in the class. Also, please, if you haven't already, pick up a schedule right outside on the music stands after class. Okay, and please take out your phones and silence them. This is a live recording. Now, next week, who knows who's coming? Anybody? Elizabeth Smart is coming, so be sure and not miss that. She is a victims' rights advocate. She's an author and also the founder of the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. So that will be a really fun one. So today we are honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we're going to start out with a musical number by two of our Snow College students who are students here from the Horn School of Music. Angie Petty, who will be accompanied by Elijah Hancock. They will perform an African spiritual called Wade in the Water. So following their musical number, I'll introduce our speakers. So please welcome Angie and Elijah.
Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water, children. God's gonna trouble. God's gonna trouble. God's gonna trouble the water. In the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. I said, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Down in the valley, down on my knees, wade in the water, asking my Lord to save me, please. I said, wade in the water, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Up on the mountain, Jehovah spoke. Wade in the water. Up on the mountain, I saw fire and smoke. Wade in the water. I heard a rumbling up in the sky. Wade in the water. Must have been Jesus passing by. Wade in the water. You gotta wade
Thank you, Angie and Elijah. Give it up one more time for Angie and Elijah. Great job, guys. Okay, we have a special guest to speak to us today. We had a little change of plans. Our original speaker, Representative Sandra Hollins, was unable to make it today because of the weather conditions out there, so she wasn't able to make it down. But our very own Rosie Connor was gracious enough to take her place. So today we will be joined by Rosie Connor, who came to Snow College in September of 2009 and currently serves as the Director of Advancement and Government Relations. After earning a bachelor's degree in agricultural communications from the University of Illinois, she moved to Southern California, where she spent most of her professional career with numerous nonprofits. She earned her master's degree in public health from the University of Southern California and is now completing her doctorate in education at the University of Utah. Please give a warm welcome to Rosie Connor.
Well, I would like to thank Celia for that introduction and thank all of you for being here today. I'd especially like to thank Angie and Elijah for that wonderful musical number. I kind of feel like my grandmother was being channeled today because she used to sing that song to me when I was a little girl. So I guess I'm meant to speak today. So I got the call to come and speak about 2 hours ago. And so if I'm a little bit disappointing, please forgive me and just chalk it up to the fact that I was not prepared. When I was little, my mother used to always tell me, make sure you wear clean underwear in case you get in an accident. I don't know if your mother's ever told you that. And I would always say, why? Because if I'm in an accident, I'm probably going to dirty my underwear anyway. But she would say, no, what I'm telling you is you need to be prepared. And so hopefully my little bit of preparation, that little speech I keep in my back pocket, will come out today and I'll be able to inform you, maybe a little bit of entertainment as well. So, as she said, I came to Ephraim in 2009 from Southern California, the LA area to be exact. So, can you imagine moving from the great metropolis of Los Angeles right here to little old Ephraim, Utah? As a black woman, nonetheless. So when I came here, I said, how many black women are in Ephraim? Guess what the answer was? You! So now there's more. So since 2009, more of us have moved in, so it's kind of nice to have a little bit of company. But it's awesome to be here. I've learned a lot since I've been in Utah, and I hopefully can weave a little bit of those lessons into my conversation about Dr. King today. Before I get started, I want to give a little shout out to some classes here from Gunnison High School. Where are you, Gunnison? Okay. Had to do that. Also, I want to thank my sons. I have 3 beautiful sons who are here with me today, and so I want to thank them for coming out at the last minute to support me. Okay. So when Fernando gave me the call, I knew I shouldn't have picked up the phone, but when he called me and asked me if I would fill in today, I said, Fernando, I can't, I have so much to do. And he said, please, we need you. And I said, Fernando, just because I love you, I'm doing this, but no, I'm doing it reluctantly because this is not my favorite thing to do, especially when I only have 2 hours notice. So let's talk a little bit about Dr. King. How many are familiar with Martin Luther King? That's good, because a recent poll showed that he has one of the most recognized names in the entire world. So he's a pretty famous guy. So when you think of Dr. King, what do you think of?
Civil rights.
Civil rights. What else?
I have a dream.
I have a dream. His most famous speech. And what was the substance of that I have a dream speech? End of segregation. What else? Hope. Yes. Isn't hope a beautiful thing? So despite the fact that Dr. King gave his life, we can still have hope in his dream. And so I just included a little quote from his dream because I think The most important part of his dream is the fact that he wanted equality, not just for his children, but all children. Red, white, blue, green, purple, whatever color. He felt that equality was the most important thing that we could offer people. And so at the time when Dr. King came about, that equality didn't exist. And in some respects, it still doesn't exist today. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So Dr. King's life. He was born in 1929, and he was actually born Michael Luther King. I don't know how many of you know that. He was born in Atlanta. He was a smart guy. He graduated from high school at the age of 15, and he received a bachelor's degree in sociology from Morehouse College. Then he went on to Crozer Theological Seminary, and in 1953, he married Coretta Scott King, and then he received his PhD in theology from Boston University. Okay, so Dr. King's legacy, as someone mentioned earlier, civil rights. We think about civil rights. So when he really came onto the scene was in 1955 when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. So at the time, there was a bus boycott. Why were people boycotting the buses? Come on, this is an interactive presentation. Rosa Parks. And what did Rosa Parks do? Yeah, she refused to give up her seat. So at the time, if you were black and you were on the bus, if someone white got on the bus, you had to give up your seat for them. So Rosa was like, not today. I'm not getting up. So, of course, she was arrested, and that's when the civil rights movement really took off. There had been things going on before that, but that's when we really recognized that things started to change. And so after Dr. King got involved with the bus boycott, he then led the March on Washington, where he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. In 1964, he received the Nobel Peace Prize, and in 1968, he was assassinated. And then finally, in 1986, his birthday became recognized as a national holiday, but not in every state. Do you know which state was one of those states that didn't recognize it?
Utah.
Yes, our very own wonderful Beehive state did not recognize it. But later, they did, and it was recognized as Civil Rights Day. So, anyway, a little bit of history. So, civil rights. Why do we need civil rights anyway? Okay, civil rights was really rooted, and I apologize to those of you that I'm like blocking the screen, but I kind of like being close to people, so forgive me. So it's rooted in slavery. Slavery really began in about 1600 when Africans were brought over, not just to the United States, but England, the Caribbean. They were brought over as slaves. So in 1787, the writers of the Constitution kind of grappled with how to handle the slavery issue. Because in the South, they had lots of slaves, and if you recognize rights of states, they had more people. So they made the compromise of counting slaves as 3/5. So for every 5 slaves, they were counted as 3, or something like that. I'm not good at math. Anyway, so that's where we get the 3/5 recognition for slaves. And then in 1820, there was a great Missouri Compromise. And the Missouri Compromise allowed people in each state basically to decide whether or not slavery would be allowed in their state. So you can imagine places in the South where slaves were depended upon for the economy, like cotton, sugarcane, things like that. They weren't too interested in giving up slaves. So in 1826, this is just recognized, I'm sure was going on before then, but Sojourner Truth, I hope you've heard of her. She was a famous black woman who escaped from slavery. She began helping slaves find freedom and escape to the North. And she also began fighting for desegregation. And so at the time, you can imagine that must have been a pretty scary thing, because slavery was really alive and well. And people did not want slavery to end. And so if you were fighting against it, whether you were black or white, you were a target. Okay? And then in 1849, Harriet Tubman enters the scene. And I'm sure you guys have all heard of the Underground Railroad. That was Harriet Tubman's contribution by helping slaves escape to the north and to Canada. Okay, so then we started to see some national change about 1850. 1850 comes the Compromise of 1850 where slave trade is ended. And so that picture there you see is actually a diagram of a slave ship and how they would pack slaves in the bottom of the ship like sardines. So that is actually what happened. They were chained together, and so if the person next to you got sick or died, you were chained to them for the rest of the journey. In 1857, the Dred Scott case took place, and he basically was a slave who escaped, and he fought for his freedom. And then in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th president of the United States, and he really began to work to end slavery. Okay, so from this diagram, you can see kind of what slavery looked like in the U.S. So the South, these were the states where they held slaves. These were the states where slaves were free, over there. And then we have those unorganized territories in the middle. Okay, so as President Lincoln comes on the scene, he vows that, it's time, we need to end slavery, and the Civil War comes about. So the Civil War was basically fought over slavery. People will tell you differently, but that is what the Civil War was about. So the North, the Union, battled the South, the Confederacy, in the Civil War. And so these are just some little diagrams, basically showing what things were like then. So then in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation frees slaves. President Lincoln signs that, and it frees the slaves. But it didn't really free them. In 1865, the 13th Amendment freed the slaves, but if you were a freed slave, you didn't really have much of a life. So you're freed from slavery, you have no money, you have no job, you have nothing. What do? Not a lot. You become an indentured servant, basically, where your former master or whoever tells you, well, you can work this land for me, and I'll give you a part of the profits. And guess what? There were never any profits. In fact, each year they work, they get more and more in debt. So, in essence, they really weren't free. And then we also had organizations like the Ku Klux Klan that were vehemently opposed to freeing the slaves, who really terrorized blacks in the South. And it wasn't just blacks, they terrorized people of color in general. Okay, so in 1868, the 14th Amendment made all people free in the United States. And then in 1870, the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. So black men had the right to vote, black women, no. Okay. So in 1896, there was Plessy versus Ferguson. Hopefully you've heard of this case. But it was a Supreme Court rule that essentially made it okay to do separate but equal. Okay, that I could have a water fountain and you could have a water fountain, and I couldn't drink from your water fountain simply because of the color of my skin. Okay, that was allowed. So I often think people, it's a separate but equal rule. And I often think, if they're equal, then why do they need to be separate? And I never understood how that could be justified rationally. Because I can imagine looking at my sons and saying, you guys are all equal, but I'm going to keep you separate. And I'm going to treat each of you equally, but you'll never know because you're separate. And so, Joseph, you're going to have this kind of stainless steel water fountain. Michael, you're going to have porcelain. And Ryan, you're going to have a hose in the back. You're all separate, but you're equal. Okay. I was separate but equal. In a nutshell. Okay, and so then in 1954, you have Brown versus the Board of Education. And what did Brown versus Board of Education do? Yeah, it allowed all of us in this room to be in school together, because before we couldn't do that. I would go to a black college, you would go to a white college, or you would go to a Latino college or whatever. You couldn't be in the same college with me, because somehow that was going to ruin you. Okay? So 1954, public schools became desegregated. And then in 1955, we go back to Dr. King entering the movement. So when Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her bus, Dr. King then joined in the protest, and he gave more credence to the movement, or he brought more engagement and more involvement in the movement. Okay, so even though we often give a lot of credit to Dr. King for the civil rights movement, and he did play an important role, there were other people who also paid the price of giving up their lives for civil rights. So we had John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963, I'm sorry. And Medgar Evans was also assassinated in 1963, and Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. So Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. And we talked about he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And then in 1968, he was also assassinated. So you think about Dr. King's contributions, contributions of all people involved in the civil rights movement, and you might be saying, that's all great, but what does it mean to me? We live in a great country, everyone's free, everyone's equal, it's all great. So Rosie, what are you talking about? Well, it's not all right. Things are good, and they're great, and they're a lot better than when my parents were growing up, and maybe your parents were growing up. But we don't quite have the kind of equality that Dr. King dreamed about. And statistics show it, that in this country, if you're born poor, if you're born black, if you're born Hispanic or Latino, if you're born in some Asian Pacific Island groups, your outcomes not only for education, but for health, for income, are going to be far worse than if you were born white, or if you were born wealthy and white. Poor whites also suffer some of the same disadvantages of people of color. And so when we talk about equality, it's not just about race. It's about humanity. And I really think that that's what Dr. King's dream was about. So I've included some of his quotes, and I just really want to drive home his message through some of his words. And so he said, it may be true that the law cannot, that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can stop him from lynching me. And that's a pretty important thing. Okay? So at the time, the Ku Klux Klan would find blacks, round them up, and lynch them. And there was actually a song called Strange Fruit, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard it, but it talks about the fact that bodies were dangling from a tree. They used to call them lynching trees. And that was a very common sight in the South. Okay, another one of his quotes, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And Dr. King, I think one of the reasons why so many people admire him and respect him was that he spoke out at a time when he knew he would be beat, he knew he would be arrested, he knew he could possibly even be killed. But equality was so important to him, he couldn't turn a blind eye to that. It's going too fast for me. Okay, one more? Okay. One of his quotes, and this is one that I keep with me, is injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So basically, if we see an injustice going on in one place, it can inhibit justice from happening all over the world. That we have to stand up. We can't be quiet when we see things that happen. And this is also one of my favorite quotes. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. How many times have you been in a situation where you saw something going on that you knew was not right? Maybe someone being harmed or someone being targeted, someone being bullied, and you didn't say anything. You didn't stand up. You didn't speak out. I am going to challenge you today to say something, to speak out, to not let your friends suffer injustice because you didn't say anything. Sometimes all it takes is a word. Sometimes all we have to do is say, you know what, that's not cool. I don't agree with you. Please don't tell jokes like that. Maybe you really don't know all the circumstances, so maybe your opinion is invalid. You probably shouldn't say that, but that's what I want to say sometimes. Okay, let no man pull you low enough to hate him. And I think that's a really big deal today. I mean, we had so many protests after President-elect Trump's victory. A lot of people upset, a lot of people mad, a lot of people want to cause havoc because they're mad that Trump got elected. You know, he wasn't my candidate, but you know what? The people voted. He's the president-elect. So what do? We could fight about it and cause disunity, or we can say, okay, I'm going to give him a chance. I'm going to see what he can do. Because he says he's committed to making our country great again. Let's see if he can do it. No need for me to protest in the street, but that's just my opinion. I should tell you that if you feel like protesting, you should protest, and I will respect that opinion. But for me, I feel like unity right now is what our country really needs. And I am not going to let anyone do anything to me, no matter how terrible it is, that's going to let me build hate in my heart. Because hate in your heart only destroys you. Someone does something to you, you walk away and you go, that jerk, I could kick his, and you're like, I'm ready to fight. But that jerk has walked on and he's forgotten all about what he did to you. You are not even a memory, but you're still holding on to hate. And for every bit of hate you have in your heart, love can't enter. Positive things cannot enter. So I encourage you to not let hate build in your heart. Okay. And this leads to my last slide. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy to a friend. So that's Dr. King's quote, and I would add understanding to that. Love and understanding are the only forces capable. Because sometimes, it is so much easier to be mad at someone than it is to look at them and find something to love about them. I could do that with my kids, because sometimes they really bug me. But they're mine. Oh, I'm sorry, sound person. It's probably just blew your ears out. And I always try to find the good in someone. For some people, that's a little bit harder than others. But we can do it if we try really hard. And the benefits of looking for love and having love for people far outweigh any bad thoughts you can have about them, any memories you may have about them doing terrible things to you. Okay? So, I've spoken. Now I'd like to open it up to any questions from you. Any questions? Yes? So did you say we still have a lot of people who are persecuted?
Yeah, maybe persecuted isn't the right word, but you're talking about a lot of poor people or people of
This is not any statistically proven evidence. This is just my opinion. But I really feel like it has a lot to do with being selfish. You know, we as humans are very selfish beings. And that's not, I mean, it's human nature to be selfish. It's human nature to want the best for yourself. It's human nature to want the bigger slice of pie, you know? That's who we are. But when we put ourselves aside and try to consider others, we can make such a difference. And so I think that especially now when you see, you know, like people protesting the election or things that happen where people feel like they're being slighted, it's because people feel like they're not being heard, or it's because they feel like their territory is being infringed upon. And I think that with a little less selfishness and a little more love, we can open up those things. If we could just see that, you know, if Sally gets the same that I have, and I'm not talking about income distribution, I'm just talking about being able to help someone, be able to have the same opportunities that you have, then Sally's life will be better. And if Sally's life is better, then my life is going to be better. You know, it's like going to the emergency room in Los Angeles. There are people in the emergency room who don't have a primary care doctor. They don't have health insurance. And so maybe they're in the emergency room to get care for something that if they had just gone to their regular physician, they wouldn't need to be in the emergency room. And so I'm there with my broken arm and I have to wait because they have to see the guy with the cold. If the guy with the cold has health insurance and doesn't have to clog up the emergency room, guess what? I'll be seen a lot faster. So if we can just, for a moment, put aside our differences and look at what we have in common, I think a lot of those things would go away. Because I think right now all we're doing is looking at differences, when we're more alike than we are different. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Yes? You know, that's a good question because it's difficult, especially for me, because I'm one of those kind of people, if you make me mad, I'm ready to fight. It's true. But like I was saying earlier, if we put aside selfishness, so I'm ready to fight because you've done something, you've disrespected me, or you've hurt my feelings, or you've done whatever. If I can put aside my hurt feelings, or put aside my personal agenda, then I can see that person for whatever it is they've done and realize that maybe they did it out of ignorance, or maybe they did it out of wanting to be accepted or wanting to be popular. And so if I see that for what it is, I can approach it in a way that helps that person. So maybe I hear someone telling a sexist joke. I could go, you know what, that's a stupid joke and I can't believe you just said that. How are they going to respond? They're going to be like, whatever. But if I say, you know what, that kind of hurts my feelings when you do that. And it hurts my feelings because I'm a woman. And when you make jokes like that, it kind of demeans me and my value. Totally different context. Something they can understand. So we have to think about trying to offer understanding to that person before we try to offer them advice. Okay. Yes? On a national level, I'd probably, and her question was on a national level, what's the next step to moving towards equality? And I would say that the next step is unification. So putting aside our differences and focusing on the things we have in common, to recognize that unless we move together as a group, none of us truly advance. Maybe those at the very top get ahead, but in terms of the rest of us, it makes it really difficult. Our country, you know, just by nature of political systems and other things, we tend to separate among difference lines. But I think if we could get our political parties to come together and unite, it would send a really clear signal to the American people that we are one. And because our political parties can't unite, it's really difficult for the American people to unite. So it really starts with you, and it starts with me, and it starts with all of us. Standing up and saying, you know what, this is stupid. We need to move forward. We need to find common ground and work from there. We need to compromise in areas that maybe make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. We need to look for ways to help those who have less and do that. Any other questions? Okay, back there somewhere. Was there a question back there? Scientifically, it's been proven that we're all, there's very little that separates us. You can't look at my DNA and say that there's anything that makes me black. You can't look at your DNA and say that there's something that makes you white. As a race. Race is a socially constructed term. It doesn't really exist, honestly. I bleed red just like you do. If you cut me, it hurts. And I bleed. So there's really very little difference genetically between the races. It was a social construct that allowed things like slavery and other injustices to take place. So yes, I totally believe that we all are one. And we have more in common than we have different. I think there was a question here.
Yeah. I feel the need to preface this question because it's a part of what informs my quandary. But scholar and author Ta-Nehisi Coates spoke at the University of Utah yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And in his book that he wrote to his son, Between the World and Me, he makes two paradoxical statements that I hold as axiomatic and true. The first one is that it's not a black person's responsibility to inform a non-black bodied person about the history of racism. I think that's a very important distinction. The second one is, it's not going to change until white people decide it's going to change. The white people essentially are in the position of power to upend the system that generates inequality. And something I've been running into as a person of privilege, both white and male, is that people who don't want to acknowledge that there is still injustice and inequality typically use arguments that we are all essentially experiencing the same thing. And reverse racism is just as potent as institutional racism.
Yep.
These are the sorts of claims that even when I try to engage them in a loving way, I end up being almost shouted down or shot down and not listened to. It's a very acrimonious conversation. In your scholarly and professional opinion, what do you think that myself as a white person, how should I approach that conversation in a more intelligent or emotionally intelligent way? Because as you're talking, we're living in a very divisive political time, and these conversations are happening whether we like it or not.
Right.
How do we maximize the potential of that argument? How do we acknowledge that there is inequity, racial inequity caused by the construct of racism, and that has to be changed by the people in power without offending the people that have to do it?
Tell me your name.
My name's Adam.
Adam, you're awesome. So I really appreciate your question because it's something that I run into frequently. And my very first class at the University of Utah for my doctoral program, the teacher came in and said, we're going to talk about race. And the first thing she said was, racism exists. We will not debate that. We will not talk about the fact that maybe you think it doesn't. It exists. And so I think we have to get all people to understand that first, that it exists, that my experiences will not be the same as yours, that people will look at me differently simply because of the color of my skin than they will you, that when I go into Nordstrom's, which is my favorite store, in City Creek that it might take me a little bit longer to get someone to help me than it'll take you. Those things are true. I don't really care what you believe, and this sounds like a terrible thing for a lecturer to say, but I don't really care what you think about that. These are my lived experiences, and it is true. My life is different because I am a black woman. It is different than yours, and it always will be. And like Adam said, we need more understanding on both sides, but particularly we need whites, and I love you, my white brothers and sisters, but I'm just saying this to you. You have a position of privilege, whether you recognize it or not. When you say, oh, my friend, you know that you're probably talking about a white person. But if you're talking about a black person, you'll say, oh, my black friend. Is that not true? We have to preface it. If it's not white, there's a preface for it. That is white privilege. And whether you want to recognize it or accept it, it is true. It is statistically proven. So until we can get some people to cross that line and say, yes, there is racism, it doesn't mean you're at fault. You didn't do anything. You didn't make your great-great-grandfather have slaves. I don't hate you for that. You don't need to feel guilty about it. Just accept it and say, you know what, it exists. I'm moving on. I'm going to go make me some black friends. I'm going to go make me some white friends. And we're going to have a party, right? We just have to unite. We have to put the race thing aside. And that's not to say it doesn't exist, but I think until we are ready to put it aside, we'll never be able to meet in the middle. And sometimes we won't be able to meet in the middle. Sometimes we're going to meet a little to the left. Is that the left? Yeah. Sometimes we have to meet a little to the right. It's my right. So we just have to recognize that. And so when you have those conversations, sometimes, you know what, Adam? You're just going to have to walk away, because that's what I do. Just say, you know what? I respectfully agree to disagree, but I'm going to go and make a difference. What are you going to do? Any other questions? I think I'm out of time, actually. No, I still have 4 minutes.
What do you think that, well, actually, do you think that we have a responsibility to show people that stereotypes are not true? For example, me, as whatever my race might be, that I have a responsibility to represent, where I come from. I want to ask you what you think about that.
Yeah. So that's a really good question, Sergio. I feel like I'm always representing my race, especially here in Utah. So like when I am on a trip somewhere, I'm flying, and usually the first question the person asks me is, so where are you going? Oh, I'm going to Salt Lake City. You going to Utah? Yes, I'm going to Utah. You know what? I live there. And they say, there are black people in Utah? And I say, yes, there are. You're looking at one. And so I feel like I'm always having to explain sometimes, or I'm the one who has to speak for my race, or the one who has to do this. And I don't think that's a terrible burden, and it kind of goes back to Adam's comment that, I shouldn't have to explain my experiences all the time. But sometimes we have to be in those positions in order to help make change. So I'm okay with having to explain things to some people. I'm okay speaking here today, because if it makes a difference, if it changes someone's life, if it makes you go out of here and just act a little more kindly towards someone else, then I've done my job. And so it's not a burden for me to speak of the black experience, because I love it. I love who I am. I love my life. I've had some wonderful experiences. I've traveled around the world. I've got to meet all kinds of incredible people. And I can say I did that as a black woman. I don't have a problem saying that I'm a black woman, because when you look at me, you know it. Why shouldn't I say it? And just like it should be okay for you to say you're a white male, I'm okay with that, as long as you recognize what comes along with that and you use that responsibly. Because I know as a black woman, some people tell me I'm intimidating. So I could walk around intimidating people all day, like, get out of my way, do this, do that, because I'm a black woman and I said so. But what good does it do? it's much more effective for this person to see me as, you know what, she's just an awesome person, and I like working with her because she just brings awesomeness to the table. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? I think I could have time for one more. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't see you. That's a good question. I'm going to try to channel Martin Luther King right now for a minute, see what he would say. You know, I'm not really sure what he would say. I would think that he would say, you know what, America, you have done a great job in moving forward. You've done a great job in trying to present equal opportunities. But I think he would also say you still have a little ways to go. I once heard someone say that he felt like if we stopped talking about racism, it would go away. I disagree with that because I think we have to have the conversations. Because otherwise people think, well, there's no problem. Why are those people out there protesting? I don't have a problem. My life is great. The police don't beat me up. I can go home at night and not lock my doors because my neighborhood is safe. You have to look at the context in which you're living in. And then you also have to look at the situation of others and not judge them because of that. One thing that I have to say about moving here to Utah is that, you know, we live in one of the poorest counties in the country. And so some of the same problems are here that are in South Central Los Angeles. People don't want to recognize it, they don't want to acknowledge it, but they're here. Drugs, violence, broken homes, unwed mothers, they're all here. And so until we can sit down at the table and say, you know what, we all have problems, let's figure out how we can work them out together, nothing will change. And so I think Dr. King would say we need to sit at the table more often. He was great at bringing people together. We need to bring people together. And we need to not forget that the struggle continues. Does that answer your question? Okay, well, you guys have been great. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate this opportunity.